And joining us now on the debate, Pier Giorgio Di Cicco, Toronto's former poet laureate. Jan Wong, journalist and author. Drew Hayden Taylor, playwright and the author of Motorcycles and Sweetgrass. Rudyard Griffiths, author of Who We Are, A Citizen's Manifesto. Margaret Wente, columnist with the Globe and Mail and the author of You Cant Say That in Canada. And Terry Gitersos, a PhD student at the School of Kinesiology at the University of Western Ontario. Good to have everybody alongside this evening for a discussion about what's happened in this country over the past 2.5 weeks. And one of the things we know has happened, Michael, if you would, here's the tale of the tape. We know we came third in the total medal count, USA first, Germany second, but there we are with 14 golds, the most ever by a host country, in third place in total medals with 26. Let's not forget the 7 silver and the 5 bronze as well. And here's what the VANOC CEO John Furlong said in the closing ceremonies when he said, compare for a moment the Canada that was with the Canada that now is. I believe we Canadians tonight are stronger, more united, more in love with our country, and more connected with each other than ever before. These Olympic Games have lifted us up. Let's start with Jan Wong, whether he's right. What do you think?
I think he's right. I think that a lot of new Canadians felt they were really part of this country for the first time, and I think the younger generation of Canadians also thought that way. Because I can't think of a moment in recent times that we all were united, well, 80% of us watching the same game. But I think, like for my children's generation, my son is 16, he really felt it. And the school actually opened up on Sunday, and kids went to school on Sunday to watch the game. I couldn't believe it. So I think it is a moment, and I agree. We were united.
Peggy?
What's not to love? You know, I'm a former American, so I watch these hockey things with some amusement because it's not in my blood. It's in everybody else's blood. But you know, in the end, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. And it's absolutely true what Jan said about the immigrant experience. You know, we had some conversations with the guy who runs the pharmacy across the street, and he was saying, how about that Patrick Chan? And is he gonna win? And you know, we had a connection there. So it was something that actually did bring us together. You can be cynical about it, you can laugh about it, you can, you know, poo on Own the Podium, but in the end, go for it. Relax and enjoy it.
I have a person in my music band. I have a band on Monday night, high schoolish band, and she said, wasn't that great? It was another flute player. And she said, wasn't that great, that guy who scored the winning goal? And I go, what do you mean the guy? It's Sidney Crosby. She goes, who's Sidney Crosby? But she watched the game, and we had this long conversation at band about how much she loved it. So really, all these people like Peggy who don't have hockey in their blood really felt like they were part of this and really were happy when we won.
Pier Giorgio, you don't have hockey in your blood, or you didn't, I imagine, when you were born.
I'm Italian. I didn't even have soccer in my blood. Forgive me. Major confession. Listen, in a world, in a society where the government knows more about us than our neighbors do, where you can go the whole length of the GTA or any American city and see nobody walking around the street, in cultures where increasingly people are wary and distrustful of each other and don't look at each other unless the other person's not looking or seeing them looking, what's not to love? One is delighted to see throngs, people on Yonge Street. I have a confession to make, though. While that was going on, I did see the game. How could you not see it? They played it, the integral parts over and over again. But it was the only time where you could really safely and leisurely drive to Niagara Falls or anywhere. I mean, you want to take care of congestion and infrastructure, more hockey games across the board for everybody.
You could have gone bowling on Yonge Street until overtime.
That's
Once
right.
overtime happened, you could barely walk on Yonge Street. Okay, Roger, what'd you think?
Well, I think we all agree that it was, you know, a terrific event. Great to see Canadians excel. I guess I wonder a little bit though about some of the rhetoric, especially Peggy out of your paper. It's at times been a bit overheated, a bit panting. This notion that this is a defining moment in Canadian history, on par with the other great milestones of the 20th and 19th century, that this was a moment where Canada was recognized on the world stage. I mean, come on, people.
Well, isn't that true?
It was a lovely Olympics, but do you think folks in Greece were glued to their televisions going, wow, those Canadians, that is just such a terrific global contribution to world society and culture? I mean, I think we need to to kind of, maybe drink a little less of our own bathwater and move towards a slightly more rational and sane conversation about what these games were all about and what their impact was.
Looking for motive here. The Globe was sort of one of the official, media outlets. Do you think they were torquing this story for that reason?
Well, look, I wouldn't be too cynical to say I'm sure there were a lot of extra orders, maybe, Peggy, for that special Olympic edition that landed on my front porch. I'm a very happy subscriber. On Monday morning, there's a lot of commercialism in these games, and if I have a worry, maybe as one person on this panel who is under 40, it's that my generation consumes nationalism in a different way. And I think the Olympics was easy for us because it had all the hallmarks of a brand. It had an anthem, it had a uniform, it had a logo. And other kinds of nationalism, more traditional nationalism based on history, on institutions, on language, that other countries like Britain, France, or the United States use to build a sense of common community, that's tougher for our generation that's been raised more as consumers, Steve, than as citizens. So I kind of miss the citizen piece, the sense that there should be responsibilities and duties that come with being proud of your country, proud of its accomplishments. This to me was a one-way street of entertainment, sheer fun, a full-throated roar for what it means to be Canadian. Great, but it's not what makes a country.
Just before I go to Drew, do you want to defend your newspaper's approach? You want to call it that?
Well, I think to some extent we reflected the mood of the nation, which was completely euphoric. And sure, it was a bit over the top. Is it going to redefine us as a nation? I don't think so. But let's face facts, all the other things that you talk about as building blocks of nationhood, language, institutions, those are the things that we fight about for the other 50 weeks of the year. This is the only thing that we haven't fought about, so it's a break from reality, and I think a refreshing one.
Okay, Drew, then Terry.
Well, speaking from a First Nations background, I'm always a little suspicious of people trying to tell me or us what is a defining moment. However, not the game on Sunday, but the game with, was it Slovakia? Just prior to that?
The one they almost lost in the last minute.
Yes, I was in Vancouver for that.
I shouldn't say lost, the one they almost got tied in the last minute.
Exactly. I was in Vancouver for that. I was launching my new book there, and we were doing a sound check, and I know the exact moment the game ended. Not because I was watching it, I was busy doing a sound check, but out of nowhere, the ground rumbled. We're in the middle, and all of a sudden, just rumble, and like this big, huge cheering, and we all looked at each other and went, game's over, and we won. Okay. And we moved on. So I think in being in Vancouver, being a part of that whole situation, yes, there was a wave of red and white walking down the streets all over the place. And it was, I think, a really interesting and palpable symbol of unity, of pride. And watching the last game on Sunday, I was back home on my reserve in the woods, and watching it, it was much more private enjoyment of the game, but still the same sense of, I don't know if I can use pride's the right word, but it was the same yet different, if that makes any sense at all.
Okay. Terry.
As someone else under the age of 40.
You might actually be under the age of 30.
That is correct.
Okay.
I am, however, old enough to have vague yet, decent memories of Calgary. And
88 Olympics.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I do not remember them being anything like this. The reaction to the Vancouver Games was really much, as someone that actually studies sport national identity, I was not expecting as frenzied, as frenzied a crowd, as euphoric a sentiment as we ended up seeing. Sport really is, like, just to maybe elaborate on something that Rudyard said, sport really is, pretty ideal for the expression of let's say national pride, because it presents pride and national identity as really in a really unambiguous fashion. So who are we? Well, we are those people wearing red. We are the people that's you showed the medal table earlier. We're Canada on the medal table, and we are. We can be as courageous as Joanie Rochette, or as gritty as the men's and women's hockey team, or as fun-loving as John Montgomery, or so on and so forth. And we're better than the Norwegians, but not as good as the Americans, which kind of sucks.
Although per capita we beat them.
But it's even though, I mean, I was expecting, some sort of, as someone that is, kind of in the business of observing these kind of things, I was expecting, some sort of outpouring of national pride. I was not expecting anything remotely close on this scale.
Okay, Peggy?
Steve, I'm slightly over 40. But
I never would have known.
the closest that I think we've come to this is Expo 67, which I confess to having gone to when I was slightly under 40. And you had that same sense of pride in your nation. The world was coming to see us. We put on a good show. We were happy. It was a great party. It went on longer, but it was really the same sense of pride, national pride before the world. And there's a real commonality there. We felt, we felt just great. We could hold our heads up for all kinds of reasons. It was a huge success for different reasons than these, but I think it was the same sort of uniting feeling and big golden glow afterwards.
Let me follow up, Jan, with you on that, because the one thing that I've heard people comment on over and over and over again, Stephen Harper said it the other day as well, is that Canadians have always been a patriotic people, he thought, but that these games, and particularly considering how well we did, gave Canadians kind of the opportunity, if you like, to wear it on their sleeve like they never had before. You agree with that?
Yes, and it gave us the opportunity to pound our chests, pump our fists, and sort of be like Americans, which makes me a little bit nervous, but I think it's good. I think it's good to be proud that we're Canadians. It's good to be number one. We don't have to just be, polite and say, you go first. Mm-hmm. We went first, and I think that was great. And it's a little bit is good, not too much though.
Pier Giorgio.
I grew up in the States.
Wow, how many Americans are here?
And I came to Canada precisely because Canadians were the kind of people to say, you first.
Kinder, gentler.
Yeah. And there was something about this event that made Canadians look like the America that I left many, many years ago. That is to say, in your face, we are Canadian, we are nationalistic. But I have to go with Rudyard a little bit on this, because the question of nationalism, identity, and pride these days has everything to do with how, in fact, people live their lives as citizens, global citizens and local and national citizens the rest of the year.
Just be specific.
Can you define yourself? I ask myself. Can you define yourself by what you have in common? And what you have in common is winning is hockey. It doesn't really make a lot of or sports or any one thing. It's wonderful. It does a lot for confidence to say we were first in that. But the neat thing about a wise man said to me, he said, you don't know how to win if you don't know how to lose. And Canadians, that's what makes a nation great finally, is how they go through all the rest of the year, even their conflict, the drama, their narratives, with compassion, with feeling, with empathy, not just by winning. I think winning is great, and it's good to say, you're first. It's
well, keep in mind, we did come 7th in hockey last time. So that cycle of winning gold in 02, 7th in 06.
But Steve, last week, the beginning of last week, I saw that in the paper. There was Melissa Hollingsworth, is that her name? And I'm also a Catholic priest. But I saw this woman in a national confessional, weeping, almost apologizing to the nation for not having succeeded as well. And I had the impression from the media at that point that Canada had been doing poorly. They hadn't been doing all that poorly. They had 15 medals. They were third already by then. Suddenly I realized there was this competitive streak that I didn't entirely recognize in Canadianism, and I'm not sure that I entirely liked it.
Roger, you wanted to come back on that?
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I think, look, sport is part of our national culture, our national identity, but does it make our country? Is it the sine qua non of Canadianness?
Don't you think hockey is?
It's part of it, Steve, but it shouldn't be all of it. I mean, we should have a richer view of our own citizenship, a richer view of our own identity that encompasses both the highs, but also, let's say, maybe the lows. Tomorrow is the throne speech. We then have a budget, the grind of parliament, the regionalism of this country, the challenges of bridging 2 national languages, the challenges of 30 million people in a world of billions to project our voice, our values, and our image. That's the the hard work of Canadian identity and Canadian citizenship. So let's enjoy the games, let's have fun. Hey, we spent $3 billion. I think a $3 billion party should be a lot of fun. But now let's understand that, you know, if we want to have that same high, we've got to find it through working on some kind of meaningful things that change us and change the world.
Drew, did you agree with Pier Giorgio when he said there was almost an ugly American aspect to the way Canadians behaved during this games when we
Kind of.
did well?
In fact, what I was thinking was, this is one of the only cases where nationalism was considered a positive thing. Because we've seen nationalism tear apart many countries, within the countries or country against country.
Or was this nationalism or patriotism?
I think it's both. We're talking about it being Canada's sport. That's a form of nationalism, and Canada against the world, Canada against the States, all these different things. And then, you know, watching these people walking down the street, going, "Canada's great, we're number one." I think that is a form of nationalism, but it's a, if I dare say the word, a positive form of nationalism.
I think we could use a little nationalism in this country. I think we have been missing it for many, many years. And people haven't felt comfortable about saying they were proud to be Canadians. I think it's very important. And when you said that you felt that we were becoming American, I disagree, because the moment that it struck me was when the women's hockey team won. And they gave the medals to the American women, and they were kind of upset, right, because they lost. But the crowd clapped for every single player. And the women players that turned around and acknowledged the audience, they got the biggest cheers. And I thought that was really gracious. And I don't think you'd get that in another country.
I don't want to minimize the graciousness that it's been said that as a host, Canada was gracious and very welcoming. Mind you, a friend of mine, Bill Gardner, also said to me, his perception of the games was, he saw a lot of Canadian flags being hoisted throughout the games, but very few, if any, of the Olympic flags. And suddenly I was alerted to the fact, well, maybe
I
this...
think they fine you if you wave the flag and don't pay them.
Written permission.
But you know, the Olympics is not just about being the best in the world, it's about being the best for the world. And granted, this was an occasion for Canadians to feel vindicated about and vindication is an important part of becoming a person or a country or anything else. It's also an opportunity to ask yourself, what are you really proud of besides the thing that gave you the vehicle for moving ahead? And that would lead me, I hope that we'll discuss sooner, the outrage of the lousy iconic exports that we came up with in the closing ceremony.
Okay, hold that. We're going to get there. We're going there, but not just yet. Terry, I want to know this from you. There had been a lot of discussion before the games had begun, suggesting that it almost didn't matter how well all the other athletes had done. If the men's hockey team didn't win gold, these games were just somehow not going to be all that good. And then I think that changed. And before that hockey game, I mean, certainly everybody wanted to win gold, but even before that game began, all of the chat I was hearing among people was, you know what, they've been fantastic whether we win gold or not here. It's not to say we didn't want to win. What's your view on that?
Well, I both agree and disagree with you. Ultimately, none of the other gold medalists got people out on the streets in London, Ontario, for example, honking and carrying on. I think hockey ultimately does. Men's hockey, let's specify. I also did not see people out on the streets of London, Ontario after the women's game. Men's hockey does hold a special place in this country, and I think there would have been some measure of disappointment if that, especially since it was the U.S. in the final, if Canada would not have won that game. But in terms of, well, I mean, there are so many other successes. I mean, it would.
That's it. That's the point.
It would be really hard to make that spin, wouldn't it?
Peggy, how about for you? If the men had not won the gold medal on the last day of the Olympics, would these games have somehow been just a wee bit tarnished?
I don't think they would have been tarnished, but there would not have been the absolute over-the-top euphoria that we saw.
Yeah.
How many people watched those games? Everybody who was not in a coma or else was trapped in the opera on Sunday afternoon watched those games. I had a party on Sunday afternoon. I got to tell you, everybody came in, they looked really furtive, and then they said, "Where's the TV?" So, yeah, without that, no, it would not have been the same. But it still would have been pretty great.
I'm looking around for a hockey fan here because I need somebody to make the comparison.
I'm a fan.
You're a hockey fan. Okay, then I'm going to start with you.
Why? You don't think I'm a fan? He looks right past me.
I've known you a long time. I didn't know you were a hockey fan.
Well,
but
I
okay.
have since my son started to
Okay.
play.
All right.
For people of a certain generation, it's Paul Henderson. Then for people of a somewhat younger generation, it's Mario Lemieux in Hamilton in 1987. And now for people yet of another
Don't forget
generation.
Wayne Gretzky.
What about him? No, I'm talking about the goal.
Oh,
Henderson's
okay.
goal in 72,
Okay.
Lemieux's goal in 87. Now you got Sid the Kid's goal
Okay.
in 2010. Is this goal as big? Will it go down in Canadian folklore
No.
as big as the other ones?
No, because Henderson's was the Cold War. There was a lot more symbolism, a lot more at stake. This is just the Americans, and they're all in the NHL together anyway. They all play on each other's teams. It was a very mild, friendly rivalry. But the game with the Soviets was, I mean, they were bugging the rooms of the Canadian players. I mean, there was a lot of like skullduggery. It was very different. I don't know about Lemieux. I think I wasn't around. But
See, I look right past Rudyard because I know he doesn't know anything about sports. Do you know who Paul Henderson is?
Paul Henderson.
You do know it is. Okay, so.
What
so,
about Lemieux?
But I think she's.
Of course, I'm a big fan of Mario.
You
Super
bet.
Mario.
That's a video game. That's something else. No, but you're right. There was a whole capitalism
This was
versus communism
nice.
aspect to it.
It was just the perfect little touch at the end of a perfect Olympics, but it wasn't cosmic. It wasn't global.
And further to that, before 1972, various Canadian international teams had spent the last 20 years getting their tails kicked in by the Soviet Union. So 72 also had the, a validation or revalidation of Canada as, the premier hockey nation, and we all know how important that is to our national psyche. So I agree. 72, I think, will continue to live on as
That's still the benchmark. Drew, what do you say?
I have to agree. I don't think this one will disappear per se. I think everybody's going to be having an adrenaline hangover into the next Olympics from this particular game. But I agree. I think it's maybe 75% as memorable or as effective as the Henderson goal.
Okay. All right, since you guys brought it up, let's go there now. The opening and closing ceremonies. I guess the opening were less controversial.
Mamma mia.
The closing, Mamma Mia, he says.
Mamma mia.
Okay, why Mamma Mia?
I was really into the whole thing. Rock, Canadians are feeling good about themselves, people on the streets or whatever. Then the closing ceremonies began, and I left the room. I was so embarrassed. The image, I think the face I must have had was in springtime for Hitler. I couldn't believe the bad taste. Or Monty Python. I mean, in fact, many bloggers and many journalists have made the same analogy.
See, what was so surreal about this is, again, here's our Olympics. We're taking incredible pride in this. We're spending billions of dollars, and we hire an Australian to do the opening and closing ceremonies. I mean, what about any one of our designers, Robert Lepage?
Sure.
What about, I think Guy Liberté turned it down because he wanted total creative control and they wouldn't give it to him. But that would have been ballsy if we'd said, Guy Liberté, you Cirque du Soleil, do it. We don't care. We know you're good. Instead, we hire an Australian to interpret ourselves to us.
Okay,
this is so perverse.
Okay, so they picked him,
Perverse.
but did he do a bad job?
Yeah.
What a
You think
Like
he
an
did?
F.
What an opportunity,
That kind of
what a
bad
chance. What an opportunity to show the world, this is what we're proud of, not just hockey, this is also what we represent.
Well, we do
also
represent. Do we not represent beavers and mounties and snow and all those other things that
Good
found their
Lord,
way?
no.
We don't.
No, we have a vibrant, a rich cultural scene, cultural narratives.
To present with some sophistication.
With some
Steve,
sophistication.
What these guys did is
Balloons.
they took a poll of, 15 different countries and then said, what are the 6 things that you know Canada about? And then they built the closing show around it. It was the most poll research-driven, commodified
Did they really
piece
do
of...
that, or are you making that
piece
up?
of...
I think he's
Did you see-
doing
did you
it.
see that?
He's making that
I think
up,
he's making
right?
that up.
Oh, did you see that?
Just
Yeah, I did.
disappointment, a huge
It wasn't that
disappointment.
bad.
Okay, hang on, Drew.
I've been in theater for 20 years,
Right.
Yeah,
and
right.
I think this was so overly produced, so unfocused. It was a shotgun effect, I thought some of it, a little is more. But I just thought, it just like the whole William Shatner, Catherine O'Hara, and all these various bands coming out of somewhere. It would have been nice to see some of the former athletes out there strutting their stuff and things, but it was so overly produced. It was
We
almost
are more.
diabetic-inducing.
Peggy, what'd you think?
Well, you know, at least we can laugh at ourselves about this. And you know, this is one thing that does distinguish us from the Americans. I mean, we don't take ourselves incredibly seriously, which is a good thing when you watch something like that.
Yeah, like
I
the
have
guy
to
who
say.
came out to fix the
Yeah.
cauldron.
That was good.
That was cute, wasn't it?
That was good.
That was cute.
That was good.
Yeah.
But
it,
the
you know,
rest of it,
it's
are you as negative
no,
on it as he is?
lame. Yes.
You are.
Yes. Oh, and the opening ceremonies I had a lot of problems with too. Yeah.
Why is that?
Oh, you know, if you weren't from Canada and you didn't know anything about Canada, you would think that it was nothing but dancing First Nations people and
There you
fiddlers.
go.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, let me ask Drew about that.
It is.
There you go.
Excuse me? Yes.
We did a program just after the opening ceremonies with a number of First Nations guests on the program and asked them about the opening ceremonies, and there was a kind of a dichotomy. On the one hand, yeah, you've got us out there in costumes dancing and all of that, but on the other hand, we would have been offended if we weren't included at all, given the history of British Columbia. Where'd you come down on that?
Well, as I said, I was out there. I was talking with the 4 host nations there at the Aboriginal Pavilion, and the sense of pride I felt everywhere there. No, I have to say, I know there was some controversy from some nations who felt that it was exactly trotting the Indians out for the tourists. But overall, talking with the people there and my own personal experience there, I actually thought it was a wonderful opportunity to strut their stuff. Those totem poles that rose up there were just absolutely gorgeous. And just all the participation that I witnessed, I find it hard to fault.
Jan, there is the question of whether we will ever get past all of these focus group tested, as Rudyard suggests, stereotypes
I believed him.
of the country. You know, is there that angle here?
It doesn't bother me.
Doesn't bother you?
It doesn't bother me to have a maple leaf everywhere and to see those Mounties, because what I like is the Mounties aren't just white guys anymore. I looked, and there were women, and there were other ethnicities, and I like that.
I didn't see any Italian mounted. I saw none
What does an
whatsoever.
Italian Mountie look
But
like?
you
Pier
know,
Giorgio?
I mean, the diversity discussion, the Italians were poorly represented.
Italian Mounties wear better boots.
Better dressed.
Armani boots.
In a country where the second national pastime, not just hockey, our other pastime is getting rid of stereotypes. We have industries across the board for the removal of stereotypes. And the closing ceremonies should have been a generator, a manufacturer, a reiteration
disagree.
of stereotypes
It's
is
symbolism.
ironic beyond belief.
It's not stereotypes, it's symbolism. And it's something that we
Beavers?
can...
Well, I'm sorry.
Stereotypical
Mounties,
symbolism.
the flags.
money.
I like
Floating
it.
Mises,
I like
Mooses?
the Mounties. I like the way they look when they're not tasering people. But,
Is Michael Bublé as a Mountie and is stripping his outfit off? And
Well, let me
well, I'm not big on the singers, but...
Let me
Let's face
follow up.
facts, by that time, everyone was so inebriated that they
yeah. It was
before
fun.
Let me
beer,
follow up on the
so-
stereotype angle, because, and this, as you all know, this is the case. We love the fact that numerous American commentators in newspapers, on radio, in television, in magazines, loved these games, loved us, loved the way we were so polite and warm and welcoming, loved our country. They all, Brian Williams on, not our Brian Williams, their Brian Williams on NBC, had wonderful things to say about this place. Peggy, why do we still appear to, we certainly relish, you might even say that we still need this kind of external, particularly American, validation when we do something well?
Well, I think much of what they said was true. And you didn't need external validation, but it's certainly nice to be recognized for your merits. For example, the streets of Vancouver were happy and peaceful, and there were little protests, but nothing big. The police behaved in an exemplary manner. There was no security all over the place, which you would have seen in the United States or almost anywhere else.
Nobody shot, nobody
exactly,
tasered,
nobody
Jan?
was shot, nobody was tasered. You didn't see heavy cop presence everywhere. You didn't see police lines. You saw happy, smiling, friendly Canadians.
But
And-
No, sorry. The cab drivers were very annoyed. Because there were lanes that were only for Olympic use. You had to have a
Right.
car
Right.
with an Olympic logo on it
Yeah.
to use the curb lanes. And that's where cabs get all their fares from the curbs, and they would get fined like $100 if they went into the curb
Well,
lane.
in Beijing, they shut down the whole city, so they were very lucky in
They-
Vancouver.
they can do that over
But
there.
that's why the Canadian women going on the ice with their cigars and their beer and their champagne redeemed us, because we're not the, stereotypical, we women who smoke cigars. So I think I like that moment in the Olympics because they broke out of this nice Canadian stuff and like, we're gonna smoke cigars in the no smoking arena.
And the IOC is investigating.
And I like it. I like it.
Good
But
for them.
back on the original question, Roger, do we still, I mean, we have a history in this country of needing, or relishing in, external validation of our doing something well. Do we still have that
Well,
here?
I would agree with Margaret here. I think it was positive insofar as we weren't for once going to the Americans and defining ourselves in opposition. We weren't, drawing the old straw man of anti-Americanism out and finding some way to use that to pump ourselves out. Instead, we legitimately look to American media for praise. We're awash in American media. Thanks to TVO, there are some refuges from the inundation of U.S. cable television, but they're few and far between, and it does make a difference. I think it's nice to have that nod, maybe slightly condescending pat on the head.
Terry, what'd you think?
Well, it's worth mentioning first that not all foreign media were, had considered Canada to be a good host.
I'm going to get to that. Talk about the positive first, then I'm going to get to the negative.
I mean, I don't really see these games as Canada looking for external validation. To me, it appeared to be I mean, I have a theory which I think also will be, I think you might be asking me in later on in the show that I mean these games are kind of like a coming out party for like a less self-conscious Canadian sense of pride, which may or may not be a generational thing. I mean, certainly people from my generation. I mean, we are the people that have gone the four corners of the globe with, the maple leaf on our backpack.
Steve, can I just interject here? Because we just went through the Copenhagen summit where, Canada arguably, according to some people, shamed itself horribly, and Canadians were taking their flags off their backpacks precisely because of the shameful environmental record at Copenhagen. So I just think that we've got to kind of look at this in a larger context. This is not the kind of alpha and omega of what Canada is to itself or is to the world. I know we're in the aftermath of the games, we're bathing in the reflected glory, but let's get real. I mean, there is international climate change. There's a war in Afghanistan.
Okay.
There's a whole
Terry,
series of dominant international issues.
Like I was saying,
We'll get to those.
like a whole generation of Canadians my age, we've traveled, and in some time, a lot of us have lived elsewhere, including me. I did my master's in the United Kingdom. It's not very difficult these days for a Canadian to, especially with many people having dual citizenship, to set up shop in somewhere like Berlin for 5, 10, 15 years. But we've all chose to come back. Ultimately, I made a conscious choice to come back. Many people have made conscious choices to come back. And I mean, I think that what that says to me is that there is a sentiment, certainly amongst the people I know and people my age, that this is a country worth living in. This is a country that has its own merits, independent of what people south of the border or what people in the pages of Pravda might be
you
saying
bring it
about
up,
us.
and I'm going right there right now, Terry.
Sorry,
I'm going right there right now, because from the pages of Pravda, written by Timothy Bancroft Hinchy, in a way that only somebody named Timothy Bancroft Hinchy could have written it. Okay, Michael, let's do this. Here we go. We all know Canada has problems with the future lines drawn on Arctic maps, and we all know Canada lives in the shadow of its larger neighbor to the south, he wrote. The abject cruelty shown by Canadian soldiers in international conflicts is scantily referred to, as indeed is the utter incapacity of this country to host a major international event due to its inferiority complex, born of a trauma being the skinny and weakling bro to a beefy United States and a colonial outpost to the United Kingdom, whose queen smiles happily from Canadian postage stamps. Maybe it is this which makes the Canadians so retentive or cowardly. Everybody who knows anything about Olympic skating, Winter Olympic sports, and international politics will infer from the pitiful and dangerous conditions provided by the Canadian authorities, which already caused one death, that Vancouver is mutton dressed as lamb. Take off the outer veneer, and the stench is horrific.
My, it's a lot of venom.
Yeah, it's a lot of metaphors too.
Well,
Somebody has issues.
somebody has issues, he said.
It sounds better in Russian, I bet. It's a stern accent.
Just a wee tad, Peggy, over the top, maybe? Just a wee tad.
Just a bit. It's wonderful.
Just to maybe put this in a better context, that particular author. I looked him up today, believe it or not, because there was a follow-up today for the closing ceremonies, and he evidently was a singer-songwriter in the United Kingdom in the mid-'80s and has since washed up in Russia and now writes attack dog style editorials for Pravda. This really is par for the course for him. I assure you that not all of his work is as well written. I don't put much stock in what that particular person says.
Are you offended by this?
Well, it's a bit silly, really. It's over the top. But your point, Terry, about people coming back, young people coming back to Canada, people not leaving. Never mind that. The fact is that the world chooses to come here. This place is a diversity. It's the wonder. So many people. It's a shrine of refuge and sanity, and has saved so many people from the tyranny of opinion elsewhere in the world. And that's the marvelous. I mean, of course they come back to Canada. It's just too bad that the Canadians aren't self-consciously, gloriously proud of that.
But
and
Jan,
now they're beginning to be.
Let me get Jan to riff on this a bit, because before, about halfway through these games, this was kind of the typical sentiment from many foreign journalists who were calling these the worst games ever. Somebody did in fact die, one of the athletes. They weren't saying nice things, and even Canadians themselves saying we're underperforming halfway through.
It wasn't going well at the beginning, but also journalists have this DNA that makes them be very negative, and it's always a much better story if you can trash something. But they have mostly come around. I guess Pravda, the news is a little slow there, but I think that the British media, who are always over the top, have come around, and I think, generally speaking, the consensus is that it was a success. The games were good, and this guy, I don't know, this Hinchy Benchy, whatever his name is, he's some failed rock star in Moscow writing for Pravda. You can't get much lower than that, so I don't think we should even give him any more time.
Where's Corey Hart today?
When London's getting the Olympics when? What year? 2012? Okay, you get even. Okay, I'm looking to you.
Not a problem.
Okay, moving on. Final chapter of our discussion tonight. And Roger, let me go to you first, because you touched on this a second ago. We won a lot of gold medals. We had a great Olympics. The feeling across the country, phenomenal. But you did touch on a few moments ago some sort of quintessential Canadian weaknesses that you feel that these games have not yet addressed. Is that kind of the next project for this country as we look forward?
Well, the interesting thing coming out of these games is if this was a national project, and let's say it was, we all invested a lot in it, we got a lot out of it. What's the next national project? Could we get as excited about, I don't know, a national daycare program, high-speed rail? I'm saying this rhetorically because we all know the answer. Yeah. It's no, we couldn't. But arguably, those are the things that would make a far bigger difference to the lives of our fellow citizens than one 18-day event to the tune of $3 billion. So our kind of enthusiasm about nationhood and national identity seems to encompass the world of kind of entertainment and self-affirmation, but it doesn't enter into the world of kind of obligation and duty and nation building and community, which demands things of us, Steve.
You keep mentioning the money, and I don't know if you read Jeffrey Simpson this morning in Margaret's paper, but he was very good about stop mentioning the money.
No, I'm only mentioning the money, Steve, because it's a matter of scale. It's an awful lot of money, and if you throw a lot of money at something, generally you're going to succeed. The risk profile goes down and goes down fast. So we spent the money, we got a result, but again, where is the drive, the passion coming out of these games that's going to lead to another great national project? I don't think that's going to happen, and I'd be curious to think if anybody around this table believes that there's any follow-on effect from this.
I think what you're saying, Roger, is that nationalism is a way of life. The way you comport yourself and share and work together, cooperate with good values, striving towards the same thing beyond the point that has already been established through the Olympics, that we are loved pretty well by other places, these journalists aside. And now the enterprise is to love each other. It's been reported to me that on the ferries going to Vancouver, people spontaneously broke out into "Oh, Canada." Well, that's great.
Beyond the first stanza?
Now can we do that without the Olympics? I mean, in a Homeric way, can we fill the streets? Can we fill Dundas Square? Anyway, can we come together and work on issues that will make us respect our sacrifices for each other?
I think it was very important. And it's the younger generation where this is going to make a difference. People who are over 40 on this panel it may not mean as much to you. I think it means an awful lot to the teenagers of this country.
What does?
Breaking out into O Canada. At my son's class
I'm not minimizing
on
that.
Monday, he has an American teacher who went to school on Sunday and watched the Americans lose. So my son said, I have art before physics. It's a physics teacher. So what he did was in his art class, he pulled up his shirt, he painted a big red maple leaf with unwashable stuff. It's all over the clothes. Upside down, he did a really good job. He went into the class, physics, he flashed the teacher. The whole class broke into "Oh Canada." The teacher walked out, pretend angry. But it was a moment.
I agree, but
Teenagers are not going to forget
nationalism-
this.
Nationalism does not just wait for an event. And my hope is that it spills over into everyday life and everyday projects.
will.
I read today in the paper that Vancouver is going through a depression, as most places do after the party is over. It's coming down. Will we go back to being self-conscious Canadians, or will we in fact carry a stronger fiber of enthusiasm about ourselves? That remains to be seen.
Follow up on that. I know a 6-year-old girl today who went to school wearing a Team Canada hockey shirt.
Let me think. Is she related to you?
She might be. And she walked into school and everybody applauded. She was the only one in the school with a Team Canada shirt on. And
It's
I
a
think
moment.
It's
It's
a
a
moment, and
moment.
that kind of thing's going on all over the country, I think. Yeah. Now let me ask you, Drew, about First Nations, because they did have a prominent role in these games, certainly in the opening ceremonies, a very prominent role. Do you anticipate that the success of these games might affect the relationship between First Nations, Aboriginal peoples, the rest of Canada? How do you see
That's
it?
a big question. I can't answer that. Ask me that next year. But what I think is
Too early to ask that today?
It's too early to ask. Let the dust settle first. But what I think is really interesting on a different level is the fact that Native people are 4% of the population, and of all, how many athletes were there? 250, 260 Canadian athletes. There's only one Native athlete there, and by doing the ratio, there should have been about 14 or 15 there. I'm hoping, and a lot of people in the Native community are hoping that the nationalism, the pride, whatever, will get more Native people out there hoping to participate in the actual Olympics.
In fact, visible minorities didn't have a great representation
It takes
among the
time.
athletes.
I always look, it takes time. You need a generation and generation to come up and start playing hockey or snowboarding. It does take time. So I think we should just be patient. We shouldn't
Plus,
be
a lot
counting
of
right
these
now.
sports too are very expensive.
Yeah.
To train for, right? And
But I was really happy when I saw the bobsled team and I'm going, wow, she has dreadlocks. It's like really exciting.
It's the lack of specific visible minorities was not necessarily just a Canadian thing. If you look at the teams from countries like France and Germany and so forth that
But they have a much smaller portion of their population who's visible minorities.
We are diversity.
in France, there's very large immigrant populations of sub-Saharan
Total
Africans.
percentage of the people don't.
I mean, it's
Percentage of the
noticeable.
population of France doesn't approach anywhere near Canada.
Okay,
in
but I
terms
mean,
of
we're talking
per capita.
0 athletes on the French team. We're talking 1 athlete of African descent on the German team. It is winter sports. Certainly, those that are at the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, I think the French also have 1 visible minority in their national assembly.
Okay, but the French also
it's a
have.
problem.
Let me follow up, Roger. You
Yeah.
brought up French. You meant France, but let me talk about French as it relates to Canada. There was a lot of criticism after the opening ceremonies that there wasn't enough French in the opening ceremonies. I think less criticism after the closing ceremonies. There was more French spoken in the closing ceremonies. Is there the same sense of pride, Canadian nationalism, in the province of Quebec among Francophones across the country today as there is clearly in English Canada, the rest of Canada?
Great question, Stephen. You're going to have to ask a Francophone that. I would say it must be fascinating and kind of teeth grinding for the separatists to see, terrific French Canadian athletes draped in the Canadian flag, cheering and being cheered on by the country as a whole. So I think this was good for national unity, and I think Canada, while we can right now thankfully say that separatism isn't the kind of imminent threat that it was a decade or more ago, it always is lurking there, and I think events like this do help cross that linguistic and cultural divide.
Peggy, what do you say?
Well, you know, that's a very good answer, because I think to an extent that's true. I mean, you look at, in some ways, these games are, to me, reflect the really good position that Canada is in right now in the world. I mean, we are so blessed. We don't share the problems of the Americans. No wonder they envy us. We have the best banking system in the world. They have a recession bordering on a depression. We have a relatively strong country. We have a country that the rest of the world wants to come to. For all kinds of great reasons. And we're the only, probably the most successful immigrant country in the world right now. We're a model for the world. So the games really reflect all of these extremely positive realities about Canada today. And they just remind us that we don't have to worry all the time about what the rest of the world thinks of us, and you know, what they think of us in Copenhagen, and what they think of us at the G20, because we have so much going for us that you know, that we can begin to take a little bit of that for granted.
So many, Jen, so many of the best stories in these games were Quebec athletes.
Yeah,
Joanne
Rochette. That was the moment for me.
Bilodeau, who broke the curse of no gold on home soil.
And
Roberto Luongo's from Quebec.
the fact that they were running around with the flag draped around their neck, I think it was worth the money. I won't mention the amount again, but it was worth the money. We spend a lot of money in this country on the problem of national unity. We have campaigns, we do all the propaganda, but you cannot buy the moment when Joanne Rochette does her short program. And the whole country is behind her, and everybody is crying in the country. Yeah. And that whole arena is with her, and she makes it, and she nails it.
She nailed it.
That is a moment you cannot pay for.
And then looked up to heaven to connect with her mother.
That's the made-for-TV movie from the Olympics.
Yeah, well, it's one of them. There's a bunch
But
of them.
you will
there.
hate, right? You will just hate that.
No, I think it's very touching. I think it's very touching. There's no question about it. I'm just concerned that we define ourselves only by these. It's a way of life. Citizenship. You know, we have a responsibility for the reasons that Margaret just said to be models of global citizenship, and that means. It's a day-to-day affair, not just a myth of a score. Absolutely.
And Joanne Rochette's moment, what taught us all a lesson. It taught us that there is strength, that you can do it. You can be greater than we expect you to be, and you will have the country with you. If you do the right thing, you will have a country behind you. And so I don't think these are insignificant things that pass.
Steve,
People won't forget
this. Here's the real measure of success. You know, if out of these games do we get, you know, one climate change policy for all of Canada? Do we get one securities regulator? Do we get, you know, one job training program for all of our different jurisdictions? Do we start overcoming this regionalism, which is in many ways crippling us as a country of only 30 million people competing with these super economies of India, China, Brazil, and Indonesia? You know, that to me would be the real payoff. That's where the money really becomes worth it, if you can achieve those kinds of outcomes.
This is, forgive me, Margaret, this is out of the Toronto Star today by a former soccer player for the Toronto Lynx, who says, "Don't undervalue the power of sporting events. It's part of human achievement that propels civilization forward. The Olympics brought out some of that eureka moment, and it will be short-lived unless we take action on it." So let's, in our last 5 minutes here, tackle this. Does this era of good feeling have legs? Or do we go back to the way things were, throne speech tomorrow, budget the day after that? You know, where's this all going? Go ahead, you want to pick up on that?
Well, just really briefly, I'll let others come in on it. You know, it is unfortunate in the sense that now we're going to have this budget entering an age of austerity, entering an age where we've got to deal with maybe a large structural deficit, an aging population. So the opportunity that some of the older folks on the panel had, their generation, when government,
do you want to hit him or should I?
when government budgets were expanding, when the balance sheet was big, you could create, Peggy, things like, you know, a national pension plan, the whole equalization system, a national health care system, things that really define the country through national projects. That's going to be a lot harder in the decades to come as we
Peggy,
enter this era.
Has this thing got legs?
Well, you know, I wouldn't overstate it. We have a nice golden afterglow. You know, it's like the morning after a really great encounter.
Morning after a really great what?
Yeah, what?
You know, time.
Well, there are a lot of did they run out of condoms?
They did,
had to put in an extra 100,000, and that's impressive. That's a big number.
I was only there for 2 nights.
But you know, the sight of all those fabulous young people who looked so terrific and were so outstanding, so exceptional, and so glowing with pride and accomplishment, and had gotten there through, you know, all hard work and perseverance and all of those things that we should properly value. That was what gave me confidence that maybe the next generation will not screw it up.
Does this have legs, this feeling we're having right now?
Well, we'll see. I don't want to be a downer about this, but I've heard the statistic more than a few times. That's speaking of competitions and who comes first, second, or third, I've heard that Canada has the 3rd highest suicide rate in the world. Now, there's a competition worth getting out of or dropping down.
Where did you hear that? That can't be true.
I've heard this a number of times, and it doesn't matter because there has been an unhappiness, a civic unhappiness among Canadians. These Olympics put a bad dent in that unhappiness. And my hope is that it will restore a confidence and a sense of Canadians in themselves as being a fiercely gracious people, and that there's pride to be had in that graciousness and the way
just
they are.
Coincidentally, I was actually looking at these statistics a week ago because we were doing a program on psychiatric issues. Belarus is #1. Former Warsaw Pact countries are 2, 3, 4, and 5. Japan is 6. Canada's not in the top 6. I know that for a fact. We just looked at it last week. But
Be that as it
I take
may,
your point,
the success, the
Maybe it's
real
number 3
accomplishment.
Prozac prescriptions.
Maybe,
or something.
okay.
The
Cosmetic
achievement of a
psychopharmacology.
country is in the happiness quotient.
okay. Last
Yeah,
minute,
that's-
Jan
that's-
Wong, come on in here and tell me whether you think
I
what we're
think-
going through has legs.
I think it has legs. Because I said the younger generation will not forget this. The glow of Expo 67, as Peggy said, stayed with us a very long time. I was there selling soft drinks. And I was underage, so I'm not that old. But I do think these Olympics will stay with us. There will be this afterglow that will fade, and then we'll be depressed a little bit.
But we're gonna have to
But in
pay
the
for
long
your
term,
retirement, all you boomers,
it's okay.
your
We're
hip
in good
surgeries,
shape.
your,
We're in good
Do we have to
shape.
think about that
we're
today?
bankrupt.
Do we have to think
No,
about that
no.
today?
We have no money left.
It will stay with us.
money left.
This glow will stay with us for a very, very, very long time.
I want to thank all of you for coming in tonight and having a very wonderful conversation, I think, about the glow and the responsibilities, Rudyard. Looking forward as we celebrate what was a magnificent, I think we can say it, Olympic Games for Vancouver and for the country. Rudyard Griffiths, Margaret Wente, Terry Gitersas, there we go. Thank you for being there on the left-hand side of the table. Pier Giorgio Di Cicco, Jan Wong, Drew Hayden Taylor over on the right-hand side of the table. Thanks, everybody.